Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 5 o'clock meeting. It's not a meeting tonight. We're doing a presentation on the draft housing study, and we have that's done by Stantec, and we have Jamie Burke here to present that for Stantec. We'll have the presentation, and this is not a regular format meeting, so anybody that has questions or presentations on that that notified us that they want to speak, that will begin, that meeting starts at 6 o'clock. We will allow some time for some questions on this study about 10 minutes before our regular council meeting for both the audience and residents and council. So, Jamie, I'll let you take it away.
That's better? Great. Oh, thank you, Your Worship and members of council. It's a pleasure to be here and be back here in this lovely community on such a gorgeous summer day. So thank you for everyone, and if there's anyone here in the audience who's here for the presentation, thank you for taking the time to be here on a lovely summer evening. So I'm here today to present the draft results of your housing needs assessment that we've been working on over the last several months. I'm going to run through 6 main sections of the presentation. I'll give a brief overview of who we, the royal we at Stantec are. We'll do a little bit of an introduction into the project. We're going to look at the population forecasting that we've done as part of the work. Then we'll move on to the actual housing needs that we've suggested. We'll, before we get into the recommendations, we'll touch on the engagement program that we use as part of the project, and then we'll wrap it up with a discussion. Our company takes safety very seriously, so before we get into a presentation in a different location, we typically start with a safety moment. Today, just a reminder to everyone, maybe when you get home or the next time you have a free minute, just check the batteries in your smoke detector. Make sure it's working properly. We tend to do that every once in a while, but sometimes it's not until we're reminded, either usually by our fire service personnel. And it's always a good idea. We've got lots of things plugged in. We know air conditioners are running nonstop. So just a gentle reminder that if you have a minute to maybe check that when you have a moment. So who are we? We're Stantec. We're headquartered in Edmonton. We're proudly a Canadian company. We have a little over 32,000 employees around the world. We're founded in 1954, predominantly known for engineering, but we do a little bit of everything. If you need somebody to do a BAT study, I can find you one. If you need somebody to do environmental impact assessment, geotechnical engineering, civil engineering, urban planning, landscape architecture, we're kind of the full suite of infrastructure services under one roof. So we're a large company. We have offices all over the world. But we have a local presence, which we're very proud of. We have our local PEI offices in Charlottetown, next to the airport. We have an office in Moncton, which is where I'm from and based out of. And then we have Halifax, Sydney, St. John's, Fredericton, St. John would probably be round out the total suite of services. So my name is Jamie Burke. I'm a senior associate with the company, and I'm the Atlantic lead for urban planning. So leading a small local team, mainly at our Halifax office. But we have a large, probably 10 to 12 employees in our Ottawa office. So we had a number of people contribute to this project. I spent the best part of my career in public service. So I've only been with Stantec for, it's coming close to 3 years, but I've been an urban planner in municipal government, a senior manager, a town manager, and have transitioned to consulting in January 2023. So I understand you all have a very important and very difficult job at times, and I admire the work that you do and your willingness to serve your community. So we'll do a little brief intro to the context. It's been an absolute joy to work with some of your staff on this project. Danielle and her team have been the most helpful, the most kind, and diligent, I must say, of our clients. They have read this report inside out, and we're very pleased that they do that. It helps us and it helps you, and they've done one heck of a job. So before I start, I want to let everyone know that your staff have had a great contribution to this project, and we're very pleased to have worked with them and for the opportunity to be here to do this type of work. So you've, I think everyone probably knows it's a hot topic across Canada. You, like a lot of other communities, and not all communities, have had a very successful Housing Accelerator Fund by the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So that has put kind of housing at the forefront of municipalities like yours, like Moncton, and like many others across Canada. And locally, the goal is to build 116 homes over 3 years and 400 over 10 years. And we're going to look at some of the needs as we get into the report. So I guess the purpose and to tie all that together is this will provide you with a comprehensive housing needs assessment of your population forecast and what is expected over the long term in terms of the housing stock that individuals and future individuals, and as well as individuals who are currently here and aging in place. We know that's important. They will also be looking for possibly a place to downsize, or if it's a newcomer, a place to settle into. In terms of the municipal structure and data framework, we know there's been an amalgamation of Georgetown, Montague, and some rural areas and unincorporated areas back in 2018, which created a much larger municipality and the fourth largest here in Prince Edward Island. In terms of the overall data framework, we've considered the municipal reorganization in the province. Some of our colleagues, one of our senior people, John Heseltine, has worked on the housing needs assessment in the city. So Stratford, Charlottetown, and Cornwall partnered on a housing needs study back in, I want to say 2021, 2022. So we have had some work in housing forecasts here in Prince Edward Island. There's some challenges with the data framework, like there are in a lot of other locations. New Brunswick just went through a major local government reform process 2 years ago. That has changed census geographies, and there's now a disconnect between what we've seen over trends, over the historical data with the current geographical boundaries. So there's some estimations that we have to do, and we've done that before. So in terms of the overall housing context, we'll start from left to right on the screen, and we'll look at the national context. So there's a housing crisis. It's on the news almost every second day. An article in the CBC last week about the price of housing now in Halifax versus Toronto. We always used to have that argument that, well, if you come out east, it's a great quality of life but a lower cost of living. So we're getting close to not being able to say that so confidently anymore, because we know the housing prices and everything from groceries to lumber, you name it, has gone up considerably in price, and that has made things difficult for a lot of Canadians and a lot of Atlantic Canadians and a lot of Islanders. So we've seen an increased amount of migration. So particularly during the pandemic, we had a large influx of people moving into Atlantic Canada, and that goes the same for Three Rivers. And that's unusual, right? We spent years where we were trying to keep our young people, and everybody was moving out to Fort McMurray and BC and other locations, and that has changed, right? We now have we've had a very large influx of people coming into Atlantic Canada, Atlantic Canadian urban centers, but also rural communities, which is remarkably different. We have certainly had inadequate housing development, and that there's no fault in that. That's a result of the people leaving. So the housing market and population growth was stagnant. So the housing market followed suit. And we also had low interest rates. And low interest rates can be good, right? If you're trying to buy in, they're great. But they also allowed people to overextend themselves and spend too much on mortgages. And then as interest rates started to creep up, people have less money for disposable income. So it's a slippery slope, excuse me. Canada has the lowest housing units per 1,000 residents in the G7 group. We've talked a little bit about immigration so far, so we've had very high levels of immigration, which has contributed to the increased housing demand. And we've, up until recently, the federal government has prioritized the labor market, and now we're starting to see a little bit of clawback, right? We're starting to see a limit on temporary foreign workers. We're starting to see a cap at the number of immigrants that we're able to welcome. We've seen certainly a restriction on post-secondary education institutions. So a lot of media attention now about post-secondary education institutions struggling to make ends meet because they relied so much on international students. So there's a ripple effect to some of these decisions. But certainly the last 5 years, we have had a very large influx of immigrants to our communities, and we rely on them. They're now contributing to a lot of sectors to contribute to our economy. So it's important for our economies to continue to grow, and we'll talk a little bit about that during the later part of the presentation. In terms of the provincial context, we know there's a high need for in-migration due to aging populations. So we've seen that, and the statistics certainly attest to that. Housing costs are, as we've already noted, they're lower than other parts of Canada, particularly central and the west. So we have been successful at attracting new residents, both young and old. But again, that's slowly starting to decrease. And we've seen significant population growth, and that has put pressure on the island's housing markets, which is not unique to other locations in Atlantic Canada. And then from a local context, the census data indicates that there's key statistics on housing types, income, and demographics, which we're going to look at here in a second. The largest economic sectors are agriculture, forestry, fishing, and Stats Canada lists hunting, but again, it's part of a larger sector, are the major sources of employment. And housing costs, at least locally here in Three Rivers, are relatively moderate compared to other urban centers. I mean, having just come through Stratford, we've probably taken an eye on what the average housing price is in Stratford and other locations around the city. And that allows you to be in a unique position to attract people. And it certainly has puts increased pressure on established residents who may need to move to other locations. That's a good incentive to potentially keep them here. So what are the recent trends? Well, we know that the population of Three Rivers grew by 11.1% between 2006 to 2021. And one thing I want to note that's based on the Statistics Canada interim estimates. So if you look at this, the census numbers, the census numbers will not be the same as these. So every year, Statistics Canada issues an update, which they call interim estimates. So we know that the census count misses people, and then so Stats Canada plays catch up every year after, and it's just population numbers. So what we do is we take those estimates and we then put them in, our John Heseltine, if anyone knows him, is our internal guru at population forecasting, and we've developed a model at Stantec that helps us estimate population growth. He then puts those estimate numbers in our projection. So they take into consideration recent trends and announcements in immigration levels, post-secondary education. We adjust the model for that type of fluctuation. And that then spits out the population numbers. So as of 2021, the population is 8,315, and we have future projections expected to reach 9,132 by 2026, and another significant increase of 12,413 by 2041. That's a lot in that amount of time. So you can see the percent change along the heading from left to right on the screen at the bottom, which is the percent change. So you can see that in 2016 we had a minus 2.9% change, and then that changed dramatically in 2021 up to 13.8. And then we have some, still very accelerated growth through 2026 and 2031. And then starts to drop even only slightly in 2036 and 2041. In terms of age distribution, which is always an important part of population estimates, you can see the youth between 0 and 14, they're expected to increase by a little over 1,200 people in 2021 to a little over 2,100 by 2041, which is a 73.4% increase, so a major increase, which is great. In terms of working age, which again, these are the people who are contributing to our economic growth, we're here in Three Rivers expected increase from about 50 in 2021 to almost 7,800 in 2041. So again, an increase projected by 50.8%. And then seniors, we see an expected increase from 1943 in 2021 to almost 2,500 people by 2041. So that's still very healthy, 28.6%, but certainly not as high as the youth and working age, and that makes sense when you consider those two are the dominant, growth cohorts. So if we look a little more specifically at the working age population, so again, anybody between the ages of 15 to 64, it decreased from 62.9 in 2016 to 62% in 2041, but that's expected to restore itself close to 2016 levels by 2041 to get back up to 62.6%. The proportion of the population that's in their child rearing ages, so capable of having children, will increase from 32.1 to 38%, as will the share of children, which is an increase from 14.4 to 17.2. So again, healthy growth numbers. And then seniors, again, a slight decline from 22.5 to 20.1%. And again, that's attributable to the increases in the other two age groups. So looking at the housing need, I guess we always look at the existing housing stock. So we've accounted for 3,285 dwelling units in 2021. Which is going to rise sharply to 4,719 by 2041. Single detached homes, like many other communities across Atlantic Canada, they're still the dominant form. So that's remains stable at 74% of the total units. And then other attached units we see rising, right? And there's this correlates to some of the numbers on the screen where we see a demand for other forms of housing, right? As we see the older population wanting to age and downsize. My dad is a prime candidate. He's in his 80s in Cape Breton with the 1971 bungalow that he and my mom built, and with a large lawn and lots to mow, lots to shovel, and he doesn't have an option to downsize, and he's not alone, right? And that's not fair, and that's no direct fault of anyone's. That's just the way that the housing market has gone, and we want those people like my dad, like many of your relatives and family members, to be able to find a suitable location where they can downsize. So we're expected to see more duplexes, multiple unit buildings, row houses that allows people to get out of their single family homes, single detached homes, and into another type of housing stock to make their lives easier. Semi-detached homes are also another very popular form in Riverview and in New Brunswick. We also project to see a slight decline in movable dwellings, so mainly those manufactured homes that are capable of being moved. The statistics numbers also account for recreational vehicles. So you can see the projections along running from north to south on the left-hand side of the table, starting at 2021 at the top, down to 2041, and then you can see below that the percent share by structural type, depending if it's from a single to a multiple unit to a semi-detached house or something that's movable. So you can see a fairly no significant changes, but some slight changes in the type of housing stock that's projected. In terms of future housing demand, we're expecting a total additional units needed by 2041, excuse me, to be 1,445. So that's a 44% increase over the current number of units. That is significant. If you think about how many units you typically get built in a year, that's a lot of building activity over the next coming years. So if you look at a breakdown by type, roughly it would be about almost 1,500 additional single detached homes, 692 units with from duplex, multiple unit row housing, and then movable dwellings would be another 55. So again, you can see the census year from 2026 to 2041, running from north-south, and then the cumulative percentage addition to the 2021 housing stock running along the east to west on the screen. Ownership versus rental is something that we always include in housing needs assessments, and you can see the overall ownership rate in 2021 is 72.6%. So that's people that own their homes versus people who would be renting or paying a monthly rent to someone else, and that's projected to slightly decline to 71.3% by 2041. Part of that could be the baby boomers who may be looking to get out of their home ownership and move into some other type of option. Single detached homes, 89.2 were owner occupied in 2021, and that's going to remain the dominant form of owned housing in Three Rivers, as well as that's consistent with many other Atlantic Canada communities, and particularly rural areas. Other attached units, so that's that kind of addition to the housing stock that we want to see increase over the years, and you'll see recommendations here momentarily that we're hoping will help facilitate some of that housing, or at least encourage it potentially. So we're seeing much lower ownership rates, or almost 0% for multiple units in 2021, and these structures are primary rental, and we expect them to continue. And those movable dwellings that I've spoken about, there's a high ownership rate, so almost 91% of them are privately owned, and we see that increasing very, very slightly over time. In terms of some recent trends, I guess, that we've highlighted, we've got 5 of them on the screen. So housing affordability being one. So we know 13.9% of households are spending 30% or more of their income on housing. In terms of the condition of the housing stock, 10.6% of the dwelling units are considered unsuitable or in need of major repairs. There's a core housing need, so a little slightly over 13.2% of households are in a core housing need, meaning they cannot afford acceptable housing without spending at least 30% or more of their income on housing, which is significant. Overall income levels, the average household income here in Three Rivers is $78,600, which is slightly lower than the provincial average, so nothing to be alarmed about. It is only slightly lower. And the rental market, there appears to be a high demand for rental units, particularly multiple unit buildings, driven by affordability and population growth. We know that many newcomers to our regions, they're not looking to own a home. We have a relatively new staff member at Stantec, and there's no interest in operating a lawnmower. no interest in shoveling snow. That's not part of the culture. They want to rent a small unit, and that's what's important to them. And we expect that to continue. At the same time, we're hearing about an increased need for multiple bedrooms within a building. So we know that lots of people that are coming, lots maybe a bit too much, but we know some people that are coming to Canada are looking for multiple bedrooms because they have multi-generational families with them. So that's, the traditional one bedroom rental unit is not going to work. We were doing some work with the town of Riverview in New Brunswick, doing a very similar exercise, a housing needs assessment, an affordable housing strategy. And one of the stakeholders that we spoke to was the Multicultural Association. And, they have families coming over, not just 5, 6, we're talking like 10, 12, 15 people. And, good luck, you have families that are buying semi-detached units and renting out both sides in order to all be able to kind of co-locate in one building. So, changing the housing style to accommodate that type of family numbers is not going to happen. Certainly not going to happen overnight. So we'll just a couple slides on the engagement sessions and interviews. Whenever we do a housing needs assessment or any type of housing strategy, we typically want to talk to other people because sometimes finding out what's happening locally helps us as we form recommendations, particularly with the private sector, because they're the ones who we rely on to build housing units. We know that municipal governments are getting pulled in different directions. Back in the day, it was service delivery, so we delivered services to property, and now we're doing all kinds of different things, right? And the Housing Accelerator Fund is just another example of how municipalities are being expected to do more, which isn't in their traditional wheelhouse. So we had a small focus group of stakeholders from the real estate industry, the development sector. We've spoken to town representatives, of course, Danielle and some of her team. Obviously, Stantec was present. We've interviewed some of you, and I know my colleague Navesh has spoken to you over the phone, including planning committee members. So basically, this is what we heard in terms of housing types and demand. That there appears to be demand for one-level housing. So, basically getting rid of the stairs, right? That small detached garage, that small unit, everything's on one floor. People don't need to worry about kind of going up and down. We know that's particularly important for seniors, but also for anybody with mobility challenges, that those types of units are not easy to find. They're certainly not easy to find in Sackville, New Brunswick, where I currently live. We heard lots of comments about seniors housing, the need for more dedicated seniors housing options. So that's not necessarily a multiple unit building. That could be, a multi-level institutional seniors care home, and perhaps there's some, rental units that are attached to that to allow people to, again, do that age in place cycle where they rent a unit, they take care of themselves, they don't need care, but when they do need care, they only have a short step away to be able to go and receive that level of comfort and stay in their community, because we know they play cards, that's their social network, and we want them to be able to stay in those tight-knit communities because that's what's going to keep them happy, and that's what's going to help hopefully keep them healthy and safe. I know the municipality has been promoting accessory dwelling units, so secondary suites. You think about that backyard garage and you renovate that into an apartment. Not everybody can do that. It is expensive. There's building code issues, there's servicing issues, but it's an option that we want to promote, along with doing in addition to putting on that, building a new piece onto someone's home to accommodate somebody, or putting an apartment in the basement. Those are things that we want to be able to encourage the not just the private sector, but also existing homeowners and new homeowners to be able to do, and understand the rules that they can have comfort in doing that and make the investment fairly quickly and economically. Because a lot of times having that additional revenue from somebody who is new into home ownership, that can make the difference between being able to get into home ownership and not. So it makes home ownership attainable for some people. We know there's an interest and need for multiple unit buildings, so there's a growing demand. And units are renting quickly. We're seeing that trend across Atlantic Canada. Again, diverse unit sizes, so we know there's always going to be a need to cater to individuals and people who are alone or single, but multi-generational household and large families are also important. So we don't see too many 3 and 4 bedroom rental units, and we're convinced that we're going to have to get to that in order to continue to allow our communities to thrive and grow and increase their numbers. And then lastly, affordable housing. We communities are struggling with this, not just around Atlantic Canada, but across Canada. There's a significant lack of affordable housing, and again, a need for more, 3+ bedroom apartments. And it's of course, it's easy to put that on a slide and say like, this is what we should have, but it's also not easy for the private sector, right? They need to be convinced and confident in the market. They need to be able to go out to a lender in order to get money to build these projects. So it's again, some of the actions and observations in this report are not going to happen overnight. In terms of the economic and financial factors, we've heard construction costs are definitely a barrier to building more units more quickly. If anybody's tried to build anything from a deck to a bathroom renovation, we know that the price of lumber has gone up considerably. And it's aside from that, it's one thing to be able to get the material, but then secondly, you got to be able to find somebody who can actually do it. And being able to source contractors is getting increasingly difficult in a lot of different markets. So construction costs are certainly a barrier, as well as the available labor. Rental prices are certainly creating barriers between new leases and older agreements. So we've seen this. People wanting to renovate their apartments in order to get the market value up, and then they end up displacing people who are already in the units, and that's a problem. There were comments about an equitable rental system, so suggestions for a flat rate structure to alleviate financial pressures, which, as we all know, is very difficult. And that also puts the private sector in a financial disadvantage. So there needs to be something to offset that, because those that are constructing housing, for the most part, unless you're a nonprofit, it is a business, so they need to be able to make a return on their investment. We also heard a potential need for seasonal workers, so they're a vulnerable demographic and certainly face challenges in securing mortgages, and we know that they're important to the economy and local economy. From a community services and infrastructure perspective, we heard very clearly there's a critical need for a new nursing home within the community, and we know this again is not easy, because you need a licensed operated nursing home, and we know there's some other stakeholders in the process that we need to rely on in order to have those things come to fruition. And we also heard that there's a potentially disconnect between provincial and municipal planning for new schools. And again, we see the education sectors within the provincial service delivery, and sometimes they choose school sites without going through proper consultation with municipal partners who manage sewer and water systems and who do their own population forecasting sometimes, and they have critical information that can be of value when new schools are being located. From an infrastructure perspective, we heard there was a need for a master servicing plan and more so a comprehensive servicing map, so the private sector will be able to see on a map very easily where services currently are and where services are going to be planned for the future. And I know just coming in on Route 4, there's been a lot of servicing work here locally in the last few years, and more on the radar. So that may be kind of a low-hanging fruit that the municipality is able to do to help show the private sector where services are currently planned. And recreation facilities, again, these are big ticket items, and we know again that municipalities are trying to do more with less as it is. But we heard there's a shortage of primary outdoor space, and So, sorry, at the moment, recreation facilities are primarily indoor, primarily outdoor, with limited indoor options aside from the arena. So, again, there was some comments made that recreational facilities can help attract people to the community when you have more infrastructure for programming to keep people engaged and healthy. And then lastly, from a zoning and development perspective, we know your documents were redone in 2023, but there were some observations regarding I guess, a reevaluation of zoning regulations, particularly with respect to residential uses. And again, it's not just looking at the permitted uses to say what's permitted where. Oftentimes it's doing a bit of a deep dive to say, okay, what are the parking requirements? We know municipalities across the country are looking at allowing 4 units as of right in low density zoning, which is a major change. But we've seen fundamentally different ways of doing that. You know, we have having this debate in New Brunswick at the moment, and the 3 big players, Moncton, Riverview, Moncton, Fredericton, and St. John are now have all implemented their 4 units as of right, and we've seen vastly different approaches. St. John has basically taken a very aggressive stance, very small lot sizes, 4 units as of right allowed on any lot, so you could knock down a bungalow and build a 4-unit building. Fredericton has taken a completely different perspective. They say your primary residential use has to be a single unit dwelling, and then your extra 3 units has to be through accessory dwelling units, and they have to be at a scale that's comparable to the neighborhood. So if you think about that, you'd have your bungalow, then you'd have a backyard garage that's converted into maybe an apartment up top or down below. You'd have a basement apartment and an addition to your home. So again, all at the same scale of the neighborhood. Yes, that creates parking challenges, right? So we're seeing municipalities intensify this along transit routes, which isn't available in all communities, particularly rural communities, you know, like Three Rivers. So it creates some challenges. So again, there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and we're by no means indicating that, but there's definitely some best practices around Atlantic Canada now and throughout Canada on how to implement additional density in low density areas. And it's a change for neighborhoods, and we understand there's consultation that has to happen around that. We heard about a need for family-oriented housing, so priority for family-oriented developments over apartment complexes, and focus on vacant properties. And many are used as in vacation or investment homes, and that's just making the housing shortage worse, right? We're seeing this, you know, you look at Three Rivers, and or not Three Rivers, excuse me, North Rustico, you know, Charlottetown's grappling with the Airbnbs. They're great for anybody who's looking to go and visit these locations, but from a housing perspective, they end up removing, you know, available housing stock from the market. So again, we heard that as part of the engagement sessions. So the recommendations in the report are at the tail end. They're around, I believe, page 48 or 49. And we'll just kind of summarize them, and happy to elaborate on any that council wishes. But basically, suggesting that the increase in the housing supply by identifying development opportunities in surplus land. So we know in many communities there's surplus properties, and it would be, we've heard from the private sector that and the nonprofit sector, that it would be beneficial if they had a list of vacant properties. And we often hear from municipalities that we're not really in the property business, so we don't own a lot of property, and that's fair. But sometimes you have come across parcels that are, you know, we really just sat there on the books for years, so they could be repurposed. But there's also potential provincial and federal holdings within our boundaries that we should be aware of, and we should talk to those stakeholders about what the options are for those properties. What is the lifespan? Are there assets on the properties? Could they be repurposed, et cetera? So it's just I guess a flag that's one thing that could be evaluated. Accelerating housing development by removing barriers. This really gets into the zoning provisions, and again, doing that deep dive on zoning provisions around residential uses. You know, we know the R1 and R2 zones in in Three Rivers are those traditional zones. They limit development to a single unit dwelling and an accessory apartment. You know, and you need R3 or mixed or something else to be able to do a little more density. And that's normal across many Atlantic Canadian communities and Canadian communities. But all we're saying is that it's worth, I guess, exploring that to see if there's a willingness to find small ways to add additional housing in some of those low density areas. And if there's not, there's still other requirements. There's setback requirements, there's you know, parking requirements that we've had for years that we haven't ever really evaluated. And I think we need to look more closely at where these developments are. If they are close to services, if they're walking distance to a lot of our amenities, then maybe we do give developers a bit of a break on the number of parking units. But again, that's a council discussion, and we're just flagging that as something that could be an option as a way to facilitate additional housing. Implementing policies to improve affordability, and you see one of the recommendations specifically around grants. You know, and providing small or modest economic incentives to the private sector, and that's a slippery slope, right? And you'll see there's caveats in the report to say you need to be very cautious when you do that, because we know that the demands on municipal services are not getting any less. You know, despite assessments going up, we're still expected to do more for less. Our communities are growing. We heard a large cry for indoor recreational facilities. We know that costs money. It relies on provincial and federal money to be able to justify and construct some of these projects. So we know we know that municipalities don't have just a bag full of money to be able to go out and hand out to developers, and you run the risk of being criticized for doing that because you're then kind of in the private sector market. And you have tiptoed into grants. You've got a modest affordable housing grant. You've got a commercial incentive for somebody who wants to increase, you know, or upkeep, improve their commercial property in Montague and in Georgetown. So you've done it, and albeit carefully, and that's a good thing. But there's grant programs out there that communities have explored where, if a developer is proposing a large building, we'll just use a large building because it's the easiest one to make the case, and it's going to create over a certain level of assessed value, which you're then going to generate in property tax revenue. Then when they pay their property tax, you have the option to provide a portion of that back to them in a grant format. They're still paying their property taxes, but you could pay a portion of that back. And we're seeing communities kind of amortize that over multiple years. Right, so you can say, okay, well, if it's assessed value over $500,000 up to X, we'll give you a 5-year repayment schedule. On year 1, you'll get 80% back. On year 2, 65%, and that depreciates over the 5-year period. If it's a multi-million-dollar development and it's going to, you know, generate money for the town, you could stretch that out over 10 years. Those are typically the two common numbers that we've seen municipalities implement. And the nice thing about those grant programs is that the development still gets built. It eliminates eliminates the risk not eliminates, but certainly reduces or manages the risk to the municipality. And it's not money that you have budgeted, right? So you're relying on the development community to implement that, construct the project, and then you can kind of get into that repayment schedule with them. Again, that's a council decision, and it's a policy decision. But again, the point is there's programs out there that are not just giving a check to a developer on a price per door like we're seeing with the Housing Accelerator Fund. Many communities now, $12,000, $18,000, $20,000 per door, per unit that's being built. Again, that's Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation driven money, and that's an option. But we're saying there's other options out there that are more manageable based on the limited budgets that municipalities have. So it's just an idea to be able to explore that. And I know there's been some discussion about that type of program here in the past. So again, just a flag. We're seeing a struggle in lots of communities to be able to get multiple unit buildings approved. Again, people are reluctant, they don't want the communities to change, and I understand that, right? We've all lived in a neighborhood, and as a community starts to grow and evolve and change, that doesn't sit well with everyone. But we think that there's a narrative there that municipalities can help deliver to help communicate some of the way our communities are changing, and perhaps being a little more proactive in how we do that, to let people know how our communities change and how we need them to continue to grow in order to sustain our local economy. So you'll see a recommendation in the report about a communications plan, that's specifically targeted to the housing industry to kind of change the narrative around multiple unit buildings. We have lots of examples of semi-detached dwelling units, in small fourplexes in Atlantic Canada that they're not cheap. So we got some stereotypes about, the people that are gonna move into these places and that's gonna change. And the reality is that a lot of times, it can be someone's, mother, father, relative, son or daughter, who's going through hard times, that are gonna end up relying on some of these units. So, again, just a potential option for the municipality and an opportunity maybe to change the narrative. Implementing policies to improve affordability. We suggested that in the report. Supporting communities and meeting housing targets. So again, they're kind of you can't just kind of make the recommendations and see the stuff and then kind of shelve the report. There's an obligation that we feel to continue to reevaluate, and work with staff to keep an eye on grant changes. As we know, every 6 months there seems to be a new program that we haven't really been aware of. So it's important for somebody in the municipality to be kind of keeping their finger on the pulse of those changes. Housing partnerships. We oftentimes hear that we don't know what some of the other stakeholders are doing, so potentially you'll see a recommendation in the report as an event to bring people together in that industry so that we avoid duplication and that people get introduced to, maybe it's a nonprofit housing provider, people learn what's coming down the pipeline in terms of unit counts at the municipality, et cetera. So again, just a role for the municipality, or potential role for the municipality to do that. And then you'll see the last two there, offering a broad range of housing options. That's again to diversify stock and tailoring strategies to local needs. You'll also see a recommendation there about a potential housing navigator position. And this is also something that's been discussed. Like Stratford right up the road, for example, has been one of the first out of the gate to do this. And that's just a potential pilot project where we have somebody in the municipality. It could be somebody who's already here. Doesn't need to be a new position. Who's really the face of housing in the municipality, and they can, help identify grants, potentially help with grant writing. They can be responsible for the surplus land inventory. They can be responsible for organizing this kind of annual workshop or event to bring people together. So you can slowly start to see what those roles and responsibilities and what a mandate of that position may look like. So, Your Worship and Council, I know that's a lot. It's a lot to cover in a short presentation. The community's changing. We know your community is going to continue to grow and evolve, and housing is going to be really important to allow you to continue to do that and maintain a healthy economy.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Yes, our community is changing for sure. I think everybody's communities across Canada have changed a lot in recent years. We have a few minutes for questions. Is that okay with? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Council, does anybody have any questions? Any councillors? Go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, you said that the average household income in Three Rivers is $78,600, right?
Yep.
That's just clarified.